Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Today is Monday, October 7th, 2024. We are gathered for our 1:30 Community Planning Infrastructure and Resources work session. There are 3 items on the agenda. With that, I'll introduce those of us on this side of the table. My name is John Kafalas, Commissioner from District 1, joined by Jody Sheddock McNally, Commissioner from District 3. Commissioner Stevens is not with us this afternoon. We also have our Assistant County Manager, currently serving as our Acting County Manager, Lori Kadrich. And Lori, is there anything you'd like to say to cue up our little discussion?
Not other than this is our usual Monday afternoon meeting with the Community Planning Infrastructure and Resources Group. And with that, I think we can turn it to Leslie.
Welcome, Leslie.
Okay, thank you, Lori.
Colleagues.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Leslie Ellis, Community Planning Infrastructure and Resources Director. And so this item that we have before you today is one that actually involves 3 out of the 6 Community Planning Infrastructure and Resources departments. So I'm proud to invite the team here to present to you, and you'll hear shortly from Rebecca Everett and Chris Fleming and Rusty McDaniel. This has also involved the Sheriff's Office and our attorneys at various times, and as you may recall, you heard from this team about a year ago to give you an update and request some direction on our special events process and blackout dates. And so they'll give you an update on how it went for this year past, and then some recommendations going forward for the next year, as well as start the conversation around land use code updates. So with no further ado, I'll turn it over to Rebecca.
Great. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Rebecca Everett, Community Development Director, and the special event permit program sits within community development, but as Leslie said, it's a partnership with several other county departments as well as external reviewing agencies, and really a team effort to ensure that special events serve as beneficial economic activity and opportunities for recreation in our community, and are not detrimental or causing issues for our community. So we will today summarize how things went in 2024, particularly around the Horsetooth Reservoir area, and how we implemented some of the changes that we got approval for this year, and recommendations for the year to come. We also want to start a conversation with you today about upcoming changes to the land use code requirements related to special events, and get your guidance on the scope of those changes and some of the topics that we should be looking at as we reopen that section of the code. So we will talk about some of the trends and challenges and other lessons learned from this year, as well as how the blackout dates around Horsetooth Reservoir went, and then receive some guidance from you all and answer any questions that you may have. As we have shared in the past, last year and early this year, we are seeing an increase in the pressure of special events during peak summer months, particularly around Horsetooth Reservoir and other roadways that are popular for recreation in the summer months. The road events in particular tend to generate the greatest amount of challenge because the public right-of-way is a resource that is shared for many different purposes. Not only do we have residents trying to get to and from their properties and living their daily lives, we often have people out recreating independently, riding their bikes or running out on our roads. And then when we add special events on top of that, whether that's road races or group rides, motorcycle rallies, things like that, it can really cause congestion on our roadways. We have also seen a trend, particularly since 2020 and the COVID era, of new events coming to our region. Some of these are events that have been pushed out of the Denver metro area or Boulder County and into our region, and so we're seeing some pressure there, in addition to the events that have been going on for many decades within our community. Another challenge that we have we have encountered this year is the one-size-fits-all nature of our code requirements. So our code really treats all types of events the same set of requirements, same thresholds for when a permit is needed, and that's something that we want to take a closer look at as we update the code next year. So looking at some historical data, I want to give a couple caveats related to 2024 here. First, 2024 is not done. So the numbers that you see there, you'll see it looks like it may be starting to trend downward, but this chart does not include events that have not yet been approved for this year around the Halloween time or around the holidays. So there are still events in our system that haven't been approved yet. So that's why you see the numbers start to come down in 2024. There are also some events that get approved through the Department of Natural Resources that are smaller permits that don't go through our full permitting process that aren't accounted for in the 2024 numbers yet either. But as you can see, we did have fewer road events. That's that orange bar on the chart. Fewer road events this year than we did last year, at least so far in the year. And I think that's in part to some of the limitations that you all approved around the Horsetooth Reservoir area, which is where we see a lot of interest in road events. And so that is by design. We're intending to put some limitations in place to better balance public safety, transportation circulation, access, and other needs with special events. So in a moment, I'll pass it over to Chris Fleming to talk about in more detail the blackout dates around Horsetooth Reservoir. But I wanted to summarize some of the recommendations that we'll be reviewing with you today and look for your guidance on. The first is staff's recommendation is to permanently establish blackout dates for those peak weekends in the summer around holidays and other historically busy weekends around Horsetooth Reservoir. This year was a bit of a pilot to test it out, and the resolution that you all adopted in January of this year really only approved blackout dates for 2024. So we want to look to extend that, and our recommendation would be to establish those blackout dates permanently. We would also recommend removing the exemption for legacy events on the blackout dates, and Chris can go into a little bit more detail there, but the blackout dates did not have significant impact on these legacy events, and we think that there's been enough notice now for the event organizers to reasonably expect them to adapt to some date changes. We have a limitation this year on each stretch of roadway was limited to 2 events per month, so including around the Horsetooth Reservoir, and we'd like to see that extended as well. I'll let Chris describe some other additional limitations that we may want to consider related to road events. So those first 4 recommendations there all relate to road events, especially around Horsetooth. And then finally, we recommend updating Land Use Code Article 7 in 2025, which is something we've discussed as a major project for our work plan for a while now. So now I will introduce Chris Fleming with Department of Natural Resources, who will go into a little more detail on what we experienced up at Horsetooth this year.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Chris Fleming, Larimer County Department of Natural Resources. I'm the Visitor Services Division Manager and Patrol Captain for the department. Here we've got a chart showing you the blackout dates that were utilized in 2024. We really focused on the holiday weekends there, you'll see, as well as trying to get some of the busy weekends on either side of those, just to give our residents, recreationists, and citizens a break from the road events up there. This map is showing predominantly those courses and roadways around the Horsetooth Reservoir area that are really challenged by these events. This is County Road 27, 3080, County Road 42, and 23, as well as I think the Buckhorn is in there as well. The blackout routes in particular for 2024 were only for the Horsetooth Reservoir for 3080 and 23. So the other roadways were not part of that specific blackout route. other than the limitations on, one event in any 14-day or 2 events per month, I think is how it was worded. And so these are some of the additional limitations that we'll be asking for consideration. We'd like to direct events that have a pattern of safety issues to consider different routes or times of the year. We would like to fully deny events that have a pattern of noncompliance with permit requirements. We'd also like the commissioners to consider a cap on the total number of road events per county, because we are aware that limiting these events on the Horsetooth area can push these events outwards into the county. And so considering a total limit on the number of events in total within the county. We'd also like to consider a submission window for all of the road races. This would allow all the legacy events, all of the events to be looked at the same time and given consideration at the same time. It would also give us more time to fully vet these events. If we had a submission window at the beginning or the end of one year and into the next year, just giving us an idea of vetting the events, weighing the importance on the community and the impacts within the community. Would also allow us, as the commissioners directed last time, to allow for some preference for local and 501c3 events. Right now, they're all first come, first serve. And so by doing this, it would give us a better idea and help us coordinate with these events into the following years.
All right. Oh, yes.
Before we go into the proposed code changes, Article 7, perhaps this would be a good time to pause and see if we have any questions or feedback. I believe Commissioner Shattuck McNally would like to start that conversation.
I would. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go back to the second one, deny events that have a pattern of noncompliance with permit requirements. Is that for all special events throughout the whole county or just the ones around Horsetooth?
We would want to explore that for all events around the county, certainly, but I think this specifically came up related to some legacy events around Horsetooth. There are events that have been that have a longstanding presence in our county, that are well-known events, that are also very difficult to work with and do have a pattern of submitting information late, changing their routes, not complying with their permit conditions. And Chris can speak to this better than me, it causes some chaos and impact out on the roadways. While that's a practice that I think makes sense for all in terms of kind of holding event operators accountable, I think we're specifically sensitive here to some of our legacy events that we may not be able to support anymore.
If I may, Mr. Chair, can I continue? Thank you.
Then I do have a few questions.
I understand. Thank you. I live out in unincorporated parts of the county that are impacted by this. And when we have roadway events that are not around Horsetooth, is there a requirement for traffic control at intersections with bikes? And if there's not, how is that taken care of?
Yes, and I think I'll invite Rusty McDaniel from engineering to speak to that.
Sure. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Rusty McDaniel with engineering. The answer is it depends. If it's a road race that's following the rules of the road, we don't necessarily require, and the sheriff's office works more closely with the event organizers depending on the size of the event. But if it's a race, they're more than likely to have traffic control requirements put into place. We have been talking about in 2025 increasing the amount of traffic control that we ask from event organizers. We're seeing bigger bike events where they're further out. We're seeing a lot of gravel road bike events that cause issues that people aren't aware of the event happening, miles from where they're planning to go. So we're trying to work with ideas of how we can, one, get the notice out earlier so people that may be going up the following weekend would know that there's going to be an event, and also work with the organizers to not try to put too much burden on them with traffic control, but we do need to increase that.
Okay, thank you. My last question for now. Excuse me, I'm just sorry, I think I did not take enough time to swallow my lunch. So, the submission window. So, we have historically folks who apply right before the event or not with enough time. So is your suggestion or a consideration is if they do not submit within this window, they're out of luck for the year? Is that my understanding?
This is a recommendation that I think could look different for different types of events. And the recommendation here is really specific to road races and road events. And so I don't think we'd be looking at one submission window for the entire year for all events, but taking a look at events that might be around the Horsetooth area specifically, or road events specifically, so that we can look at those. And then if something comes in after the road race window, it may be that they're out of luck, or it may be subject to whether there are other events and there's other availability during that time frame. So maybe it's possible that there are no events planned in October and somebody comes to us after that window and we can accommodate that. So I don't want to be completely definitive in that, but the intent would be to get everyone who's interested in similar weekends together to then decide who gets priority and how those limited number of weekends are allocated.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. That's all I have for now.
I'd like to ask a few questions. First of all, regarding the earlier on the comment that Department of Natural Resources sometimes approves smaller events. What is an example of an event that you all would approve that our folks would not necessarily need to sign off on?
So those are really focused on our education events when we're working with school districts and they're bringing kids up for guided hikes in our education team, as well as research. So each of the research students from various universities are working with our resource folks. But we used to have a one-size-fit-all. They had to go through the special event permitting, and we've since pulled that apart. And so
Great.
that's what we're doing.
Thank you.
You bet.
My next question is regarding the approved blackout dates, the ones that we just went through in 2024. It seems like the only legacy event that was in that calendar is the Colorado Run, which I think is on May 25th. And I seem to recall last year the timing of that, or we made some accommodations to allow that to go forward. So I guess my takeaway here is there don't seem to be very many, quote, legacy events during the proposed permanent blackout periods.
That's correct. And actually is it the Colorado Marathon that you're referring to, the one that comes down the Poudre Canyon?
There is something, I think it's a 10K, the Colorado Run
Oh,
on
okay.
May 25th, that used to actually run along whatever that not Monster, the other one, one of those big hills. That's the one I'm referring to. I think the Colorado Marathon down the Poudre Canyon, I think is in the beginning of May or so, isn't that right?
And it wouldn't be captured here since these blackout dates really relate to the Horsetooth Reservoir area. So these blackout dates, they wouldn't apply to other roads. There could still be events in other parts of the county on these dates. This is really around Horsetooth, but you're correct. There are not that many events that are affected by the blackout dates. I think one or two that happened within these blackout dates, and those are events that we believe could be shifted to another weekend and still be accommodated, or shift to a different route if they want to keep that same timing.
Commissioner, I believe the Colorado Run that you're referring to is one that occurs over the Memorial Day weekend.
Yes, May
And
25th.
Yes, sir, and we worked specifically with that event coordinator, and she shifted her race earlier in the morning.
That's what I
And so we were able to accommodate that event, and she worked with us to make that. There was one other legacy event, and I think it was the Bike MS that did occur over one of the blackout weekends, but I'm not positive about that.
But I guess a relevant takeaway is that most of the so-called legacy events are outside of the blackout time frame.
Yes.
Just one or two more, please. And that is, in looking at the larger map, the road system impacts Horsetooth Reservoir region. It certainly makes sense to extend or expand the proposed blackouts. Having gone up Risk Canyon Road for in September for the Mountain Festival for the fire district up the volunteer fire district, that's a heck of a narrow road, and there are a lot of bicyclists on there. How do you? I mean, they must have group rides at least. I don't know if they have races, or maybe they do. How do you do public safety on a road like that, which driving up there was harder than heck to make sure we're giving folks 3 feet, and there's not much room to move around. How does that one work? Well, we want to get our law enforcement folks in on there. That seems like a really tough one.
Are we on there? In general, just the public safety.
Would you identify yourself
Sorry,
for
Brad
the record?
Harkin, Larimer County Sheriff's Office. So you're talking the Mountain Fest up there, up by the fire station on Risk Canyon, and there was no other events going on. But you're right, the group rides that go up the mountain, because they are under that 40-person limit, they don't have to apply for any kind of permit. So what we see when we're talking a lot of these conflicts is not necessarily a large event, but they are organized, but they don't meet the threshold. So if you get onto any of the websites for group rides or running as well, that's when we start to find that there's groups of 20 to 30, 40, up to 39. They know what the limits are, and they go out and ride. So along Stove Prairie, Risk Canyon, Pooter Canyon, they could do a quick group ride or a gravel ride going out somewhere. There's a whole host of them out there. They're not bad. They're just adhering to our limits. But you get two of those, two groups of 40, or let's say 39 people, all going up Risk Canyon at the same time. One's the Northern Colorado Bike Riders Association. The other one's Larimer County Bike Riders of America, and they decide to ride the same route the same day. We see a lot of conflict, and that's where we don't want to add another race into that mix as well.
Thank you. That's helpful. I would think that maybe that's something we're also looking at to try to address, because if folks know the limit 39 and then they don't have to go through a process, and then our law enforcement folks and our rangers are kind of like, how do we protect people? Because it's really, if you have 39 people going up that Risk Canyon Road up to Stove Prairie, it's going to be a long time before you're able to get around those folks.
Absolutely.
And that could lead to some frustration on the part of drivers and bicyclists and all the rest.
And then combine that with the motorcycle group that decides to ride at the same time as the bicycle group, and then they all meet at the same area.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you, Lieutenant. Let me just ask one more question, if I may, then we can move on to codes, if that's where we're at. Additional limitations, pattern of safety issues. I guess we've touched on that. What are some examples of safety issues? In terms of non-compliance, how often does that occur? Where folks who have submitted permits, gone through the motions, and yet they're not following the conditions and so forth. Does that happen a lot?
I would look to both Chris and Brad to weigh in, because they're seeing these events actually happening on the ground more than anyone. I know there are a couple events, and we don't want to, name names today, but there are a couple of events that persistently over the years have presented a lot of challenges, or we're still negotiating things all the way up to the last day of the event, or they all of a sudden, they stay on the road 3 hours longer than they said they would, or there are things that come up that have become a pattern over time. It's not there was one incident that, we couldn't work around, but it's been a pattern over the years. But Chris or Brad, is there anything you'd like to add?
I think one of the bigger challenges, and Brad and I have both experienced this, is route approvals. We'll approve one route, and day of the event, they do something completely different, which is a challenge to everyone. If Brad's trying to organize traffic, safety, enforcement, and getting intersections shut down and they move where they're going, it definitely puts us in a state of, and we've had them not had all of their pieces of their special event permit completed by the time their event happens. So, and it definitely is a pattern with one or two of the events.
And I would add that we see a lot of the rules of the road events. So they say we're not a race. So if it's a race, it's a timed event. People are trying to vie for an entry into the Boston Marathon, right? By getting a good time here in Colorado on a downhill, they can get their way into a bigger event. So that's where we typically see the roads close down versus these events come up and they say we're going to be a rules of the road, which mean that they're expected to adhere to all the rules, but then they don't. That's the biggest thing, that they have event organizers or people flagging people through intersections trying to stop the other traffic when the participants are supposed to be adhering to the rules of the road. But something to also consider is the rules of the road have changed. So in the last 10 years, the legislation has passed that bicyclists do not have to stop for stop signs necessarily. So that is the rule of the road now, whether we like it or not, or whether you agree with it or not. The rules have changed for society, which allows certain things. But when you get 50 or 60 people doing this in a big pack, it does cause a lot of confusion and heartache for everybody using that road that's trying to share it.
Well, I have another question, but I'll wait since I said that was my last one. But maybe we can come back to that one.
Yeah, we'll have plenty of time for questions.
Thanks.
And I have just a couple slides related to code changes to just close us out here. And then we welcome additional discussion on road events specifically or on any other topics related to code changes or special events.
I'm hoping that keeping the finish lines open for longer periods of time to give me a chance to cross the finish line isn't part of the problem. Usually it takes me a little longer.
We'll build that into the permit requirements.
Sorry.
All right, so talking about code changes. So as we've discussed in the past, Article 7 of the Land Use Code is the section of the code that regulates special event permits. It sets forth the process and the requirements, including when a permit is required, when it's not required, and all of the criteria that must be met for a permit to be approved. One of the criteria that must be met for any special event permit is that the comments of all the referral agencies have been sufficiently addressed. So we don't let any permits through where there are reviewers who have denied a permit. So that the process is very collaborative in that sense. And the code requirements themselves have not been revisited since they were initially adopted and put into place. And they don't address a lot of the changes that we've seen in the scale, the number, the types of events that we're experiencing in the county. And so we do intend to update the code next year. We have identified some focus areas, and we've started to do some research on other cities and counties around the state and in our region to understand how other communities are regulating special events and start to think about how we want to regulate special events for Larimer County and some of the specific challenges we are running into with our codes. So we've identified a few focus areas that we want to dig into as we update the code, and we would welcome your feedback on whether this captures everything that you want to look at, or if there is anything specific that you want to call out that you want to make sure we evaluate when we update the code. So starting with applicability, when is a special event permit required? Like Brad was sharing, that threshold of 40 people triggering an event permit is across the board right now. And we think that that may not be an appropriate way of determining applicability in all cases. Different types of events may benefit from different criteria for determining when a permit is required. And if there's a way we could better tie it to the impact that an event could cause, that's something that we would like to explore. type of events. This is getting at that variety and different impacts and the nature of events. Not just, size of event, but also the context and where it is. Is it an event on private property? Is it an event on natural resources property? Is it an event on the roadway? Is it a community event that's on some kind of, community property? Really distinguishing between those different events and the impacts they have is something we'd like to think about. Permit requirements. So what are the performance criteria and code requirements that must be met? We have pretty stringent criteria and requirements now, but there may be some gaps in there that we want to evaluate. Limitations and prohibitions. This may get into across the board limitations. For example, we have seen that there are other counties that limit camping and say no overnight camping unless a property's already been approved for a campground. That's the type of limitation we could explore through the code update. We could have set hours of operation for music or other activities. So there are some other limitations that we could take a look at. There may be types of events we just don't want to see in Larimer County that aren't appropriate for our context. So that's something that we could evaluate. And finally, accountability. And this comes up pretty continuously throughout the event season. How are we holding event organizers accountable to the permit conditions? How are we enforcing in situations where a permit may have been required but wasn't sought and wasn't approved by the county? And what kind of penalties do we have in place, or what enforcement mechanisms do we have in place to ensure that the code requirements are being met? So those are the focus areas we have identified so far, and we'll welcome your input. I also wanted to briefly mention our plans for community engagement for the code update. So we have already begun engaging the reviewing agencies and the reviewers, and we will continue to do that throughout the process to understand their pain points and help define problem statements that need to be addressed through code updates or questions that we want to answer and work through together. And we will continue to engage all of those departments and agencies either in large group settings or individually, or even small groups such as fire districts targeted more specifically or something like that throughout the process. We do want to reach out to event organizers, and in particular we have some event organizers who have been operating in the county for decades and have a lot of insight into what works, what doesn't, where they may see challenges or opportunities. And so the event organizers will be engaged as well. And then, of course, neighbors to events and the general public, the people who either attend events and want to share their experiences there, or the people who live next to areas where events are occurring and who may have feedback. So we have we can collect from our emails, all the people who have reached out to us about events with complaints or concerns or support over the past several years, and use that to build an email notification list, in addition to press releases, other types of media to spread the word and engage people throughout the process. So we don't have a public engagement plan put together yet, but these are the types of activities that we plan to use to engage the community. So in summary, these are our top recommendations. We have that slide of additional limitations around Horsetooth Reservoir or related to road events that we want to explore as well. But our top recommendations would be to permanently establish blackout dates around Horsetooth, similarly to what we've done with Carter Lake. There are already permanent blackout dates around Carter Lake. Remove that exemption for legacy events from the blackout dates. Continue to limit events to 2 per month per roadway for those road events in the summer months. Directing events with safety issues to consider different routes or times of year where we've continued to see challenges. Denying events with pattern of noncompliance, and then update the land use code with community engagement alongside that. So we welcome additional conversation now.
Thank you, Rebecca. Commissioner?
Thank you. And I know you guys have looked at this a lot, and I appreciate the diligence, and I know it's been a lot to wrangle some of the things with increased frequency and size, and we have a cool place to come and recreate. So first off, I just want to say I appreciate you guys bringing this forward and piloting some of these things and bringing it back. I'll first go back to my question again, because maybe I didn't hear it correctly. You're only looking to deny events with a pattern of noncompliance in regards to Horsetooth, or is this for the whole county?
I think we would look to you all for direction there. We're specifically asking as it relates to road events where we see the greatest safety issues. But certainly if the commissioners support denying any event that has had compliance issues in the past, that's something that we can do.
Well, I certainly welcome that, because I do think there's others, events that have shown kind of a disregard for following rules, and also in times of high fire risk, it's kind of concerning for me. I just think it's something we would think about. So I support that strongly. My next question is, you want to put this on the 2025 work plan. So what is and I know we do a pretty good job of public outreach to inform code changes, and I know we can really make that robust and really get out there. So if you're looking to do this now, I'm assuming before the next season, or do you update starts and have that window, or are you looking to 2026? Because I have a feeling, I'm thinking to the incident at the Horsetooth Reservoir where hundreds of people showed up and we had no idea, and that was quite an ordeal. I feel like we're kind of, from my mind, kind of past the point of hey, we should be really doing something. So I wonder what that piece looks like. What are the goals to kind of get through this kind of update?
Yeah, realistically, these would be code changes that probably affect the 2026 season and beyond. We plan to engage event organizers and reviewers this fall and winter while the special event season is still kind of fresh on people's minds, and to communicate some other changes in our processes and procedures for next year. So we'll start the outreach now before 2025, but knowing that we have a lot of different questions and topics to work through in the code, we probably won't be updating the code itself until later in 2025, and those code changes would affect the 2026 season.
So one of those changes you're looking at is maybe eliminating this 40 person, because it's hard to go out and count sometimes 40 versus 50 versus 30. So is that one of those things you're going to look at removing? Because I think that's hard to enforce.
That's something that we want to look at, either adjusting or changing the way that we set a threshold. And that's been a good one to look at other communities and really understand when are they requiring a special event permit and how are they making that determination. Because it seems that every community does it a little differently, and we can get some good ideas. So it may be that 40-person threshold or a threshold is appropriate for certain types of events, but not other types of events. I think we want to just start to think through what are the challenges we're seeing, and when really should a special event permit be required based on the impacts.
Well, and I also don't want us to, let's say, my backyard, I decide to have a birthday party, and, my husband's going to turn 70 or something. That's way off. But just for example, I mean, if I have 30 people over, that could impact, though, because I don't have room for 30 cars. That still could impact the county road where I'm parking. So, I can see that kind of balance. And so I still feel like some of those bigger events still impact, people be able to walk or run or bike on those roads. And so I still, I don't know what that answer is, what that balance is. So I've been thinking a lot about this, because I kind of, this impacts my weekly life, not daily, but weekly life. So just kind of thinking about those things, because it is kind of, I have had events where there's been hundreds of Jeeps drive by my house, and they're bumper to bumper going up to Estes, and they're stopped, and I can't get out of the driveway, right? And then there's also a road race. I mean, that happened. Mm-hmm. And there was a bike race. The Jeeps that maybe you all didn't know planned a big ride up to Estes Park from Denver, and that impacted a lot of folks that weekend. And so I'm just thinking out loud of lived experience about how this is really a challenge, but it also I'm thinking safety in a lot of ways too, of just everyday folks who like to just go out and walk and run and bike in their neighborhoods. And I'm also wondering about the south part of the county. Heading from Berthoud towards Longmont, towards Boulder, there's a lot of training things, and I don't know if that's part of it, but when you have a group of 20 to 30 people training, and they're not obeying the rules of the road, they're 4 or 5 across, that's hard to enforce, but we get a lot of complaints from folks in that area who are concerned about safety or are really alarmed with that. So I don't know if that's a part of this too, and if that's something, if they're gonna have regular training rides, do we ask them to at least let us know or remind them about rules of the road? I don't know I don't know what the whole scope of this is, but I do know we get a lot of complaints from folks around the birthday area on County Road 4 where it gets where it's hard to pass. It's hard to pass because people aren't following the rules of the road, and I don't know what we have in enforcement for that. So those are just some things I'm thinking about. And I do think anything that's going to make it harder, like having a number and having people to go out to have to count, makes it hard to enforce. And then I do think there should be some accountability. Strongly feel there should be some accountability, and it should be something that is incentivizes people not to break the rules or not follow their approvals. So I really feel that time has come and gone, and we really need to maybe do that sooner than later. So that's just my 2 cents, because I'm getting, as you know, I've gotten complaints almost every week for the last 6 months about all kinds of things, and so I just know this is something that a constituent, especially in the southern part of the county, it's becoming quite a detriment, so to kind of living out there. So thank you for listening. I'm preaching to all of you. I'm sorry, but it just, even this weekend, just people calling me. So thank you.
And that's really helpful to hear what you are hearing. And some of these things we are seeing good examples in Jefferson County, Boulder County, some other counties that have even higher population and had a demand on their trail systems and things like that. And so I think we've got some good examples of how some other counties have dealt with some of these things that we can rely on.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll add a few more questions or perhaps insights. One is regarding the potential, well, first of all, working backwards. So on the Article 7, the proposed land use code changes, I think nothing comes to mind as far as adding additional focus areas. One thing that does come to mind is when you say limitations and prohibitions, other than perhaps non-compliance, I'm curious what you're thinking as far as prohibitions, because I don't know how often it comes up that we have political rallies, for example, and certainly it can be a delicate matter regarding free speech, but I don't know if that's something you're considering or regarding prohibitions.
Yeah, we're not we're not proposing anything specifically yet, but looking at some of the other examples. I mentioned overnight camping as an example that, I can't remember which community. There is a community around us that doesn't allow any events that have overnight camping, just as a prohibition. We do have events in the county that sometimes, music festivals, things like that want to do that. Is that something that we want to see or not would be a question. We have seen other communities with restrictions on hours of operation. So we could say, past 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night, there's no amplified sound or music. Talking about prohibitions, limitations, it's probably more the characteristics of the events that we would be looking at. We could look at certain types of events that maybe the county's not interested in. Certainly, we wouldn't restrict political rallies or other events that serve as a form of free speech, though. We would try to remain in compliance with the Constitution there.
Thank you. My other thought, and this may not fall under proposed land use code changes, but I wonder, in terms of community engagement, what are your thoughts on how we will proactively engage community members to avoid, for example, the situation we had up in Wellington, where there was an event planned and it really was not understood that, the organizers had to go through a special events permit. So how will that proactive public awareness occur, which may not be, directly part of the proposed land use code changes?
Yeah, great. I mean, it's a good question, and it's not part of the land use code changes. It may be that once the code is updated, that's a good follow-on step, is making sure there's then a public awareness campaign to really try to get the word out of you may need a special event permit. And, if your event looks like X, Y, and Z, please come talk to us at the county, and here's what the process looks like. If we were, for example, to ask group rides or training rides to, register or get some type of permit, that would be a change from what it's been in the past, and we would want to make sure that's well communicated. So, so it's not on Chris's rangers to do all that communication for us.
Okay, thank you. Just a bit more, going back to the previous section of your presentation. When you, additional limitations, considering a submission window for all road races, how does that complement? I thought somewhere we have 120-day, in other words, folks have to apply at least 120 days before their event. So how do these two concepts complement one another? Or maybe I'm not understanding what you...
It would be two different approaches. So,
Oh, I see.
we have adjusted our submission window for most events to, I'm looking at Denise, 60 days? 60 days prior to the event for most events. We last year, or earlier this year, adopted the resolution for road events specifically to be 120 days in advance. The submission window would be in place of that 120 days, and instead would be, you need to apply by some date, early spring, late winter, early spring,
For the subsequent year?
for that current year. So I don't want to throw dates out and get people latched in on a random date that I made up, but it would be, there'd be a time period where you can submit, and then we would have predictable timeframes where we would then review all of those submissions, see if there are any events that are vying for the same date or more than 2 per month that are proposed, and then we would use a system of prioritization to determine which events get priority. Similar, based on the feedback we've gotten from you all as commissioners last year and this year on how to make those priority decisions.
Thank you, that's helpful. Then, just to kind of wrap up with my questions here, in terms of some of these proposed changes regarding submission window, et cetera, some of the other things, what kind of stakeholder process has occurred, especially folks who are used to doing their events the way they've always done them? And also, has there been any consideration if we were to, I can't imagine we would be denying a lot of events, but if we are, what the negative economic impacts are, because they do provide economic benefit, even though it makes it harder for law enforcement, keep folks safe. Any thoughts there, Rebecca, or colleagues?
So first you asked about engagement of event organizers. Last year we had, or I guess very beginning of this year, January of this year, we had a meeting where we invited all event organizers from past years, a hybrid event in person at the hearing room and over Zoom, to learn about some of the new blackout dates, some changes in our processes, changes in timeframes, things like that. That was very well attended. We plan to repeat that again this year before the end of the year this time, so getting a little bit farther out in advance of the season and when people would be submitting for permits. So that's an opportunity for some two-way communication, not just us talking to them, but gathering some input from them on where they think we should focus, code change conversations or other issues that they see or challenges they experience in the process, things like that. So we would engage with event organizers that way. We would also have opportunities throughout the code update process to engage with them, but that's all we have planned at this moment. As far as negative economic impacts and events that might be denied, I don't think we're talking about a large number of events. Going back to our chart here of how many events we had. So far, we've had over 80 events in the county, not including some of the smaller ones at DNR properties that Chris mentioned. We might be talking about one or two or three that may have a pattern of compliance where we've worked with them for many years. It may be that we deny their event in the form that it has occurred in the past, but if they were to reduce the size or change the routes or reduce or change some of the details of their event, that we might consider that. It depends a little bit on each individual case.
Thank you very much for answering my questions. Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just thinking as you're all here. When I see 80 events and number of road events, and I know there's several that are happening that have maybe gotten, say they only have 30, but it was other events, but it still took staff time. So when I hear, look at these numbers, and I know we did look at our special event fees, I still thinking, maybe my assumptions are incorrect, this is costing us more staff time and energy than what the fees are costing, and then the enforcement is costing. So really it's costing the taxpayers to allow some of these to happen, especially if they're not following through or not following the rules. Would my assumptions be maybe on the right book, at least page or something, or close?
Yeah, so we did increase the fees last year. We have seen more cost recovery this year than we ever have in the past, and that's been very beneficial in helping us recoup some of the costs. But you're correct, there's a lot more staff time, particularly in our partner departments that's going to reviewing these applications and working with event organizers. The cost recovery that we get is mostly for our the position that we have in community development, coordinating the special event permits, and that's Denise's position here. So it doesn't fully cover the cost of that position alone, let alone the other review time that goes in.
So is that also consideration with the land use code, especially with our partner organizations, that it's costing them staff time, knowing that their budgets are also tight, limited? This is not, I mean, this is costing review agencies to take that staff time to review and interact too. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think anything that we can do to make the process as clear and predictable and easy to enforce as we can, it helps to reduce some of the effort that goes into these events. But I'm sure all of the departments who are involved in special events would appreciate the opportunity to recover costs however they can, while also recognizing that a lot of the events that we see out in our community are nonprofit organizations or community-based events. And I'll use like the LaPorte Festival that happens each year, or other events that really are local community-facing events where they may not have the ability to pay for the amount of time it really does take to administer a special event permit.
Good point. And one of my last questions, I have many more there, but I'll, I will probably be conversing with you later. So, Commissioner Kafalis had brought this up, and I had been thinking the same thing. And I know if you all have some comments as we start to tighten these limitations on Horsetooth, and there's already around Carter Lake, and it starts pushing them out onto other roadways, like the road up to Brisk Canyon, which may not be a safe road, knowing those shoulders are not wide enough. I know we have, in my neighborhood at least, I don't have to worry about, like, I have tripped and fallen into the ditch when I've tried to get over for the bike because the car was coming. There's some that have widened and improved safety, but there may be some that we should not allow events on because of the road conditions, or they're not wide enough shoulders, or just not. It's just really a concern to have something on that county road for having like the 3 feet, as you mentioned. Is have we identified those? Is that part of this process to say maybe we should not have 100 bicyclists trying to go up Brisk Canyon on a weekend on a Saturday for leaf watching? I know, I'm just curious, because I know that it makes it more complicated, but it's only going to take one unfortunate incident, and, I'd much rather be proactive. And if we start pushing these out, I would much rather be thinking about this and being proactive than just kind of like the balloon squeezing the pressure onto another part of the county. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's something like we've talked about informally, but not formally yet. And I know Brad's got more he wants to offer there.
To your point, Commissioner, the Bike MS is a great organization. They used to run up around Horsetooth. We pushed them out of Horsetooth, so this year they rode up Taft Hill. Wilson, which turns into Taft Hill. So, I mean, I hate to point out a specific event, but that event specifically is a generally well-run event, and it goes through many jurisdictions. So, I mean, it's a very big event. We pushed them onto Taft Hill, and I thought that was one of the most unsafe things we could do this year. As I drove it, as I was taking the tail end of the bicycle riders going up that, Wilson and Taft Hill is not designed for bicyclists, trash trucks, and everything else that's going up and down that road. To the point where Rusty and I started talking about how can we, if they choose this route, because they've got to get from Metro Denver, basically, up to CSU Stadium somehow. How else could we route them without impacting the Pooter or the trail system that goes on Shields, because the trail people don't want them there. But they want to have different routes so their people are engaged in the community event, if you will. How much are we going to make them spend on signage, or how do we route that safely? So that's just one event that, to your point, yeah, I think that's why events started pushing into Larimer County, because we didn't have the traffic that Boulder, Jeffco, and Metro had. But now our community is starting to catch up and have a ton of traffic, and our infrastructure hasn't kept up with it. That it's a rules of the road, so we can't legally. I mean, it's hard for me to say I'm going to prevent somebody from riding on a road when they're going to obey the rules of the road and they're going to take that liability. But we're also saying this is the only street you guys can be on. So it's a very hard balancing act for us to go through without breaking the bank. We can put out signs, we can make them close the roads, and hire 500 law enforcement officers or traffic control people, but then that event no longer makes sense for making money for multiple sclerosis or ALZ or whatever the benefit it is. We've priced people out of being able to enjoy it.
I think just to add on to what Lieutenant Harkin was talking about, unfortunately, the most popular roadways in the county for all of these bikes and roadways, they don't have dedicated bike lanes. And so hence the issues around the parks. Everybody loves to ride around the reservoirs and up the canyons and up Brist and Buckhorn and everything. And none of those roads were built to accommodate the level of cycling traffic we're seeing today. So it's a challenge around the county, and not just ours.
And I think that is the third bullet point down here. Consider a cap on total number of road events per roadway or county-wide. And that's the point that Chris was making earlier, that one thing we could explore is kind of a cap on the number of road event permits that we issue in a year, regardless of where those events are happening, to mitigate that potential squeezing of the balloon around the county.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you feel like you've gotten adequate direction from us on the questions at hand?
Yeah, so we will follow up with a resolution at admin matters to extend the blackout dates, as we heard support for continuing that and the limitation of 2 events per month in the Horsetooth area. And we can go back and discuss some of these other limitations and the feedback we got here. We certainly heard denying events that have a pattern of noncompliance is something that would be supported. And I believe we heard support for us creating a submission window to help to better manage priority for the different types of events that come in. And we will plan to monitor and to continue discuss this idea of impacts countywide on roadways and how do we mitigate kind of displaced events and where they may go. And that may be an action for kind of the conversation in the future.
And if I may, if I heard one of the points that the commissioner made, and that is that maybe one of the questions we need to be asking road event organizers is, are there training? In other words, are there times when they'll be out on the road, not for the race or whatever it is, but training sessions? That might be an important question to ask.
And if
Well-
if I might really quick, Commissioner, the other one that was piqued my interest was, we know we've had some events we've had in front of us where they wanted to have multiple days and camping. And I kind of feel that maybe you mentioned maybe not allowing camping overnight or something. That certainly piqued my interest because that might help us not have some of the challenges we have with some of the noncompliance and also not getting adequate like liquor license and other things. And then it just, when we talk about economic impact, they're not really going out and spending money outside. They're coming, staying, and then leaving. And so I just kind of thinking that we're actually taking and not adding. So just that really piqued my interest. That one's interesting for me too.
And I imagine there's collaboration when the commissioner mentioned about liquor licenses. We often get on consent agenda 6% special permit liquor issuances, or there must be coordination there.
There absolutely is coordination with the clerk and recorder's office.
Well, thank you. I believe we've had a good conversation. I hope you've gotten further direction. I look forward to further conversation. We have we're a little bit over, but do you have anything you'd like to share, Rebecca, by way of community development update?
I will defer to Leslie because I think she has more pressing updates than me.
And I'm going to invite Frank to come up. He has a brief update. We'll keep it short. We know we're past time, but just to update you on some of the work that Matt Sura is doing around oil and gas rulemakings.
Good afternoon, Frank Howell from the County Attorney's Office. Quickly, we filed on Friday a notice for party status in the produced water rulemaking because it was due on Friday. There's another one that's a carbon sequestration and storage. We've had some conversations about what level of participation we want to have in these. We'll continue to do that. But we have to file for party status because if we don't get it in by the deadline, then we can't participate. And so we can always withdraw it or sort of decide how involved we want to be. But we thought it was appropriate to at least put our name in there so that we could be participants. And then we'll continue to sort of look into how much of a participant we want to be.
Is there anything else, colleagues?
No, thank you.
Then appreciate all your good work, collaborative work. We are adjourned at 2:33 p.m.